Welcome to the New Big Five podcast. I'm Graham Greene. My guest today is the American photographer Joel Sartore. Joel, thanks very much for being on the New Big Five podcast.
My pleasure.
Joel is a Nat Geo photographer and the founder of the Photo Ark, a long-term project to document every species living in the world's zoos and wildlife sanctuaries. He's currently photographed around 10,000 of them. Joel, I'm not sure what's easier, a photography project of this size or actually building an ark?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm tired out just thinking of it.
Did you consider just building the boat?
No, I never did. I'm a photographer, I'm afraid. That's all I'm qualified to do. So that's what I'm doing.
You get to meet all these animals day after day. It must be a really enjoyable process.
Well, the process, I don't care for it very much because we have to move animals around. And granted, most of these animals are born and raised in human care, and so they get fed during the shoots and so forth. But for smaller animals, we move them into a shooting tent, a small shooting tent, or if it's an aquatic animal, we move it into a little aquarium. We try to make it as stress-free as possible and get done in just a few minutes for each animal, because we have a lot to do, and also we want to just make sure the animal's as comfortable as possible before going back to their exhibit or their enclosure. So
yeah.
It's I'll be glad when I can finish. We figure I've been going at it about 14 years now. Another 10 years or more should probably get it. We have a lot of the more common species now. So now we have to go farther to get fewer. And that means a lot of the islands in the South Pacific where the biodiversity rates are pretty high. And we just keep plugging away, man. Just keep plugging away. I'm going to go to Chile and Peru next week. So
it's a huge thing to bite off, isn't it? Is there any part of you that wonders sometimes, why did I start this, or how did I start this?
Yeah. I think about that. But I had done 17 years, I think, in the field for National Geographic magazine. Different stories, all in the field. Lions asleep in the trees of Uganda. Hippos at water holes, macaws in flight in South America, all that. 30 stories in all that way. And didn't really do a whole lot for conservation. A couple of the stories moved the needle, but not enough. And then my wife got breast cancer, and she's fine today, but that was about 15 years ago. And she was pretty sick with chemo and radiation and down for about 9 months. And so I stayed home for a year because we had 3 kids at home, and obviously she needed a lot of help herself. And so I stayed home, and when she was on the mend towards the end of that, I started taking pictures of whatever I could around Lincoln, where I live, Lincoln, Nebraska. And we had a little children's zoo there, the Lincoln Children's Zoo, which is an excellent zoo, but it was kind of hard to see some of the animals. They're very small, a lot of the animals. So I asked them to take out a couple and put them on black and white backgrounds. And that's how it started. Didn't start out to get everything. We just started out so I could have something to photograph on my, when Kathy was feeling good, but it sure turned into something major.
Yeah. I'm glad to hear that your wife's okay now. I guess something like that really focuses the mind in lots of directions. And you had that time to think, and it kind of set you on a new path from the sounds of it.
Yeah, it did. I was 42 at the time, I think. And I had really admired the work of like Edward Curtis, who documented Native American tribes around the U.S., in the American West especially, for most of his adult life, because he knew that Western settlement, European settlement, was going to really change culture or really alter their way of life. He wanted to document things while they were still fairly original. I admired the work of John James Audubon, the famous wildlife illustrator. He not only painted animals extremely accurately, birds and mammals in North America, but he gave us great descriptions of animals that he knew were likely going to go extinct even back in the early 1800s because of us cutting the forest down and converting everything to agriculture. So I really admired people like that who kind of gave their full measure of devotion to one thing and really concentrated. And I thought, if Kathy gets better, that's for me. I think I just want to concentrate on one thing, really try to make a dent. I'd seen so much catastrophe out there in the world in terms of clear cutting and overfishing and plastics in the ocean and oil spills and all this. I just thought, well, a lot of these animals that I've seen, they're likely to go extinct in my lifetime without anybody ever having met them or known they existed. So that's still the case for a lot of the animals we photograph. It's the only time they'll really have a chance to have their stories told to the world and to really see what they look like. So it's a
Yeah.
big honor, but it's a lot of work, as you said.
And how much, you talked about the sort of the impetus behind it and wanting to make a bit of a difference. How much do you see it as documenting animals before they disappear? And how much do you hope and believe that it might actually help some of those creatures stop from going extinct?
Right. Well, the motivating force really isn't just to create a big archive of what we're going to squander or throw away.
Yeah.
It is truly to get the world to care and do something about it, to lessen the impact, to protect the imperiled, to protect the common species, to protect habitats like equatorial rainforests before they're cut down. Really, when we save these other species, we're saving ourselves, because we have to have a functioning, healthy planet to grow our food and to breathe and to have good air to breathe and to have timely amounts of rain for water and all that. I mean, it's all tied together. So
it sounds so simple when you say it, Joel.
It is, but it's not easy because people want to overexploit everything. That's our nature. So this is the big question. I don't ever get depressed or anything. I just get fired up because I think about this question all the time. On our way to 10 or 11 billion humans, will we be smart enough to save vast tracts of habitat to regulate our air and our water and our rainfall patterns, fish in the seas, coral reefs? Will we be smart enough to save the life support systems for not just these animals, but for us? We're animals too. So that's the big question. But I don't really think about what the world's going to look like in 100 years or 50. I just think, what can I do? What can I do with my life? If I devote the rest of my life to this, what can I do that will maybe help? And that's really the goal, is to, the dream is somebody sees some rare monkey and learns that it lives on a single mountain and steps up and says, we're going to save that mountain from logging. We're going to stop the poaching. We're going to save that animal because, I love it, or whatever. Do I see that very often? No. But do I think that we're helping to move the needle in terms of raising world awareness about all the species out there and the things we can all do right from our own hometowns to save the environment? Yes, you bet. Our function is to educate and introduce people to these animals, and hopefully they'll fall in love with them as I have.
Have you seen solid examples like that where you mentioned? Have you sort of raised a story and raised a species and seen the change happen where people get involved?
Just a couple directly so far, a sparrow and a beetle, two very small things, but we're pretty sure that they would have not made it this far. They're not out of the woods yet, but we're pretty sure they might be extinct by now if we hadn't raised the alarm and gotten a lot of public input and motivated the government to actually enforce the Endangered Species Act here.
That must be a good feeling.
Yeah, it is. I wish it would happen more often. But, Geographic gives us grant funding to help with a lot of this, and they give us a lot of lift. Disney's involved now. And so I'm very hopeful that we can actually put conservation top of mind to the public. It seems like most folks, obviously, they care about getting through their day, whether or not their jobs are fulfilling or even there. They care about sports, religion, politics, those things. I think we need to add another column to the things people care about, and that is nature, the natural world, because it does affect us. Without pollinating insects, 1/3 of every bite of food we eat comes from a pollinating insect. Without rainforests, we screw up the rainfall cycles on the planet, and that's what we depend on to grow crops. So these things are really, really linked to our future. And what kind of planet we want to have, that really depends on the answer we see in the next 20 years, tops.
Yeah, it's an important time, isn't it? I mean, you were talking about that big question there, that big question of whether we're really going to get it together. We seem to have been hearing these warnings, that people have been talking about this since the 70s. I know there's a new urgency to it now, but what's your feeling on that big question? Do you think we will get it together? There's all these examples around the world where our leaders, are taking us in the wrong direction.
Well, the thing is that most political leaders, they are kind of drug forward in terms of their thinking by the will of the public. So that they really reflect, they poll us all the time to see what we're thinking. They care about that. So they really reflect what the public's thinking. If the public doesn't care about this, they're not going to. I mean, they're not going to do anything that would get them voted out of office. So it really is going to take a sea change in how the public sees its relationship to nature and the things we can do to save nature. That's a very grassroots thing, isn't it? We don't want to let it get so bad that the rains quit or the rains are too much. I mean, we're starting to see really brutal consequences in terms of hurricane intensity and wildfires from drought and landslides from rain. We're starting to see it now. You know, the ice sheets in Greenland melting and the polar ice caps melting, and we're starting to see this now. How long will it take? People will wake up and demand action, but how long will they wait? How long? And this is the thing: if they wait too long, which we seem to we're good at, they wait too long, it will be a very different planet, much hotter, more warfare because of a shortage of resources, more people moving around the world to get away from rising seas and conflict. So how bad do we want it to get? How bad do we need it to get before we will actually start demanding that the laws are changed, and that and because it's, you know, the government's filled with people like us. They're going to respond to what we want. So you can't really blame the politicians, but you can certainly blame the public for not really being aware of this. And so that's kind of where the photo art comes in. We use very simple portraits with eye contact when the animal has eyes, to try to just engage people and get them to start to think about the fact that there's so much more out there, that the world's a great place, full of creatures and places to save still. But do we care? What do we need to do to get them to care? I think we better be entertaining. We better be engaging. We better be able to compete with whatever's on television or on people's smartphones if we want to have a chance. But we really do need kind of another pillar of social awareness to get this on people's radar screens, the way that, you know, you would hear about a new Star Wars movie. You can't get away from it, right? You hear about it everywhere. Okay, so let's do that with the needs of nature. Let's start an ad campaign that's permanent, that just keeps that top of mind and reminds people why it's so critically important to save nature.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. I think the one key difference, though, is that there isn't, with a new Star Wars movie, there's not this sort of counter voice. There's not this powerful misinformation system that perhaps comes from the oil industry or comes from, you know, people with a vested interest in not getting climate change tackled and not stopping forests from being cut down. I mean, you know, education projects and photography projects are fantastic, but it's not like, you know, you have to have some sympathy with the public who are getting very, very mixed messages from bad information.
Yeah, this is way beyond my pay grade. How do you fix that? You know, I don't know, but I do know that the photo art's not a political thing.
Sure.
It's beautiful portraits of animals being themselves, looking at the camera. We use these black and white backgrounds to equalize them in size. There's no size comparison. So the mouse is every bit as big and important as an elephant.
Yeah.
And we just hope people fall in love with them, find a reason to want to dig in and learn a little bit, and tell the stories of good institutions as well that are helping, whether it's anti-poaching patrols or habitat restoration, or captive breeding efforts, education about climate change. The beauty of it right now is this is a great time to be involved in conservation. It's probably the best time because we can reach the whole world. National Geographic's Instagram alone, I think, is over 125 million people now. So that's great. I mean, we can really get the word out about different things going on in real time, both good and bad. We want to savor the victories out there in terms of saving a species from extinction via captive breeding, rediscovering species, saving a forest, saving a marsh or a prairie or a forest edge, mangroves along the coast. We have a great opportunity to really reach out and affect change, positive change. And I meet people every week that have really worked tirelessly their whole lives to make the world better in terms of our natural history. So they give me great hope. And you know, the worst thing we can do is give up. And the best thing we can do is just try really hard all the way through. And that's what I intend to do.
One thing that's lovely about the project, which you touched on there, is that there are these iconic creatures that get a lot of the attention, like the elephant, like the lion, and I'm certainly going to ask you a bit about that in a
Right,
moment. But
right,
this is every creature. It's the tiny, it's the tiny little bird. It's the unheard of little mouse. And could you talk a
right.
bit about that? I mean, this sort of equality between animals, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, well, if you're into conservation, if you're into the natural world, you know that the little things really run the planet. You think about the work that ants do, for example. Ants clean up the planet just like crazy. Insects clean up the planet. Scavengers like vultures or carrion beetles clean up the planet. Dung beetles. So we have tremendously intricate, complicated, and vast systems for constantly recycling waste and turning them into living matter again. And those really, really are important. I mean, they're every bit as important as the lion or the tiger, which is what people see are these top-line charismatic mammals. That's what we go to see at zoos mainly, but and they're great. But I'm really interested in freshwater stream fish, little bitty minnows. That are different depending on where they are and the turbidity and the flow of the water they live in and the temperature. I'm interested in rodents that can live out in deserts with extreme temperature swings and very little moisture. I'm interested in little brown birds that nobody really pays any attention to that might be on the decline or might be on the upswing. I mean, I'm interested in all of it. Insects as well, even parasitic insects. I really want to try to show the world what biodiversity looks like at this point in time, while we still have most of what we arrived here with through evolutionary time. So it all matters, and the small stuff I would argue matter most, and even more than the animals are the plants. I'm not working on the plants, but man, plants are just huge, and they literally keep us alive.
You don't
And
think you can take on another 25-year project
I
for doing
don't
plants,
think I
Joel?
have. No, I'm 57 years old. I do not have it in me.
That sounds like quitter's talk to me.
That's right. It is. That's right.
Yeah, I mean, I share your feelings really. I love taking pictures of gorillas and lions and those big animals, but I often find when I'm working in a place that you can walk past a tree and there's a tiny little lizard and it's absolutely fascinating and you want to
Hmm.
spend time with it and you really want to find your angles and spend time properly looking at it.
Yeah, there's a whole world, a whole universe shooting in with a macro lens.
Yeah,
I've had this discussion with many entomologists. Really, if you planted a few different types of plants around your backyard, you could spend a lifetime back there and not master it. It's
yeah,
wonderful. You can never master that type of thing. So the macro lens, we zoom in. I mean, it's just an alien world. If you look at insects, how they operate, how they find their way through the world, truly, truly amazing. We don't give them enough credit,
yeah,
but they are really fascinating. So we cover them too. We absolutely document them. We're trying to get every species in human care around the world, which we think is about 15,000 by the time we consider zoos, aquariums, private breeders, and wildlife rehabbers. It might be more. We know that there's at least 2 million species described so far, on our way to probably 8 to 10 million species. But we're just going to cover the ones really that are in human care, because I can get to those and that we know
yeah.
we're going to get them if they're already in captivity.
Yeah, I know with the project, one of the good things about it is that you're getting up close to animals that a lot of people would never get up close to. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I wondered, has there been any standout worst photo shoots, the worst behaved
Worst,
animals?
yeah. Well, worst would be chimpanzees, I think, because they're smart, aggressive, strong, fast. You know, all these things I'm not, I guess. They're very good at what they do. They're just very cunning and quick. And so I've tried getting a nice, intimate picture several times of chimps, and they just destroy the backgrounds. If people want to go on my website, joelsartore.com, and look up the chimp incident, they'll see when I started out with the Photo Ark, I would use paper backgrounds. Well, you don't use paper backgrounds with chimps. That's just foolishness, it turns out. So, yeah, I still don't have a good picture of an adult chimp. Yeah, chimps are pretty tough.
You must come out with a few scratches and bruises as well, I'm guessing.
We really try to avoid that. I've been
Yeah,
bitten a few times by smaller animals, but for big animals, it's always protected contact. It's always working through wire or bars or stanchions or corrals. It's never in there with them. So it's fairly low risk, and zoos close at about 5 o'clock. So I'm not working till midnight like I used to when I was in the field. It's fine. People get down on zoos once in a while, and I've got to tell you, zoos do a tremendous job. Good zoos now. Nobody likes a bad zoo, but good zoos with abundant funding and attention and care, such as a lot of those in Europe and the U.S., accredited zoos, they have such an important role to play in terms of education, and they understand that. They're not menageries anymore. They're conservation centers. More and more zoos in the U.S. are using every inch of what they have in terms of their facilities to embrace conservation, whether it's captive breeding or education. And we get about a third of the U.S. population through a zoo each year, and it's good, solid time. It's several hours usually. People actually stop and think and read the signage at the enclosures and learn what we can do, especially at home, in terms of the products we buy, how we live our lives, our consumer choices. That's good stuff. And since most people are in urban areas now than rural areas, this is really the only chance they get to see and smell and hear and watch an animal move, a real live wild animal move. And that's a big deal. I'm afraid that when we don't have zoos going forward, if we don't, we will, relegate nature to some quaint kind of notion on our smartphones, just like a little snippets of video. I don't see people that are raised with just that caring as much or wanting to put forth the effort to save what we have left. I really think people need to have a firsthand experience with nature to appreciate it and want to save it.
I just want to pause to briefly explain to people listening. This podcast we're doing is part of the New Big Five project, where we're creating a new Big Five of wildlife. The old Big Five, as many people will know, was based on the toughest animals in Africa for hunters to shoot and kill with guns. The new Big Five that we're setting up is about wildlife photography rather than hunting, shooting with cameras, not guns. And it includes wildlife from all over the world. The 5 animals that people really love to photograph and to see in photographs. Through the project, we're also trying to raise some awareness about urgent issues to do with wildlife, conservation, climate change, and more. I just want to take the chance to ask people listening to go onto the New Big Five website and to vote for their own personal 5 choices for animals that they'd like to be included in the New Big Five. Joel, I'm asking every photographer that I speak to talk about their own personal top 5 of wild animals to photograph or to see in photos. I wondered, first of all, what's your absolute number 1 animal to photograph and to see in pictures?
Well, I always say it's the next one that I care about, because I'm on to the next thing and I have to love them all. But an animal that was very, very memorable that I photographed recently was a Bornean rhino named Pahu in Indonesia. She is the start of a breeding program there, and she's in a big vegetated enclosure, 10 hectares, I think. She comes into a smaller corral once a day or so to get bananas and other fruits and be looked over by veterinary staff. But it's the Bornean subspecies of the Sumatran rhino.
What do they look like?
Well, they're small and they're a little hairy. They're known as a hairy rhino. It's one of the oldest mammals on the planet. And super sweet, kind of reddish in color, usually covered in mud because they love to roll around in the mud in the jungle. And that color of the mud is kind of orange. So it depends whether they've had a bath or not, whether they're orange or kind of pinkish gray. And very small horn, and they're being poached quite heavily for that little bit of horn. Horn is so expensive. And people buy horn thinking it has medicinal or aphrodisiac value, and it does not. It's just basically matted hair.
I know that's one of the sort of crazy failings of us as a human society, isn't it, really? That our animals going extinct for something that doesn't even do anything.
Yeah, that's right. So that's really an interesting one to me.
Do they have a lot of character? I mean, you spent
some
time.
They're very sweet. I mean, you can kind of you're not supposed to touch them, but if I was sitting still and she kind of puts her nose through the bars and I kind of patted her horn and her, just asked her to back up politely, and she did. And so it's a wonderful animal, very sweet in temperament. They were known historically as kind of garden pets or pests, depending on how much fruit or vegetables you lost. But they weren't scared of people. They just came right in that's really they're really remarkable animals.
Oh, great. Well, that's one that hasn't been picked so far by any of the photographers I've spoken to. What would be your top five?
Well, one that's very unusual is called the long-beaked echidna. I think there's two species, the western long-beaked echidna, and then there might be an eastern. And they're an animal that has a very small little mouth at the end of a long kind of a proboscis, a long mouth feature, a nose almost. And they have a tongue that laps up ants and termites and nectars, honey, that kind of thing. Very interesting, covered with spines, very ancient species, and hard to find in zoos, and critically endangered as well. I love seeing the attention brought to animals that are very rare, because it gives me more hope that somebody will pick up the ball and run with it in terms of trying to save them.
So that's two animals so far. What would be the other three?
Well, polar bears are very impressive. Well, they're massive. They've got an elongated neck for swimming. They make a living in the toughest place on Earth, or one of the toughest places on Earth. And they're good at going without food for a long period of time, and they're very powerful and beautiful, and they're a really impressive animal.
Perfect.
In terms of other animals, other big animals, tigers are right up there because they're so charismatic. You know, there's nothing that looks like them, and they're just, some of them are massive. The Siberian or Amur tiger is just a massive animal, and it's hard. Whenever I see one, I'm always so glad that they've made it this far, and that I get to see and hear and smell them and hear them. I'm always very excited about that, you know, especially the large ones, the Amur tiger.
What would be the fifth one to squeeze in there?
Well, this is a tiny one. Can we do a tiny one?
Absolutely. Why not?
The long-eared jerboa.
Okay.
The long-eared jerboa is so cute. It's just hard to describe. It's again in serious decline, but it's an animal that lives in real dry conditions. It has huge ears, both for hearing predators and prey. They eat insects and seeds and so forth. But they hop around on two legs. They have tiny front legs, giant back legs, a tail, and these giant ears. And they're just fantastic looking. They're so cute, and there are not very many people that have them, but they're just fantastic animals. The long-eared jerboa.
You've talked about conservation and the aims behind your work and the project. We are losing animals at an alarming rate. I think you started the project around 2006. What species have gone extinct since you started this project?
Well, we know that there's been a pygmy rabbit in the western U.S. that's gone extinct. One frog for sure, and likely a second one. I've met many animals that are down to just a handful, fewer than 10. On the most recent trip I did to Indonesia, I met two birds that are down to one each, laughing thrushes. So I see it all the time. You know, I see it on every long trip I go on, and it's pretty dire for some, but we try to use those animals as examples to inspire people to change and to go forth and make a difference. I really ask people, I do a lot of speaking, and I ask people towards the end, pick something you're passionate about. It doesn't have to be wildlife. It'd be nice if it was, but maybe it's spaying and neutering dogs and cats. Cats are really efficient predators of birds. If you let your house cat out, it's killing birds. It's killing small mammals. So there's a million things people can do. I just encourage people to do something they're passionate about and really sink their teeth into it and become an expert and work on that diligently for the rest of their lives. That is a life well lived, you know, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Where did all of this start for you? And I mean, not just the Photo Ark, but going right back. What got you into wildlife? What made you care about it so much?
My parents, really, they really cared about nature, and we weren't what you'd call tree huggers. We hunted and fished, and my father and I, and my mother liked her backyard birds and squirrels and flowers. We lived in the suburbs of Omaha, Nebraska, but they cared about it. They cared about the changing of seasons. They cared about it when we heard geese flying overhead at night on their migration north or south, and that stuck with me. And they got me a lot of books on animals, And one of those books was a time life book on extinction, or it was on the birds actually, and it had a section on extinction. And they talked about the passenger pigeon, and they showed a picture of Martha, the very last passenger pigeon, who died in 1914 at the Cincinnati Zoo. And there was an old black and white picture in there of her alive. And that was really incredible to me, how we could take something numbered in the billions and market hunt it down to this one bird. And so that, I've thought about that bird my whole life. She guides me today to want to tell the stories of other animals so that it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, so from the start, photography for you was about conservation, was about trying to protect species.
Yeah, well, I was a photographer a lot later than that. My parents educated me to the wonders of nature when I was little. And they let me, I had a lot of injured animals as pets, snakes and frogs and turtles and quail and pheasants, that kind of thing, fish. But I didn't take up photography until really the start of college. And so but I always cared about nature conservation. And so that was just part of me. Always will be.
The very last thing I wanted to ask you about, Joel, you've spent your life involved in conservation and doing your bit to sort of try and help them. But I understand that sometimes they fight back. At one time, you got hit with a flesh-eating parasite.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a bit about that?
Well, I did a story on Madidi National Park in Bolivia, and we were on a blind for about 10 days up on a platform surrounded by camouflage netting for about 10 days to try to photograph pigs that would come into a clay lick for minerals. And we all got bitten up pretty bad by insects. We didn't have any mosquito netting or anything, and we're just sleeping out in the open. And I got bitten by a female phlebotomous sandfly that carries leishmaniasis. That's the only thing that can carry it as a vector from another, usually a small mammal like a rat or a mouse or dog or bat. And then bit me and injected me with this thing. So I got mucocutaneous leishmaniasis, which is a parasite that wants to eat holes in you. And it really did a number on my leg. And so you get a heavy metal IV through a PICC line, which goes in near the top chamber of your heart to disperse the chemicals quickly through your bloodstream because it's corrosive to veins. And you get that for an hour a day for a month or so. And then...
Is it as much fun as it sounds?
More. Yeah, I remember I had to hide that from my parents because they were real worriers because of all the traveling I did. And my father happened to stop in for a visit. I lived an hour away, but he came in for a visit to take me to lunch right when the home health care nurse was there giving me this IV. So I had a lot of explaining to do. I told him the truth, and all his fears were justified then.
Yeah, there's nothing like a hole in the leg to make your parents think you should maybe change your job.
Yeah, it was an impressive hole too. But I'm healed up now. That's been a long time ago, and hopefully it doesn't come back. But yeah, we try to take every precaution, get every vaccination, but stuff happens when you're out there, and you just try to, it's the old saying, bad stuff happens to everybody. It's what you do with it. So if you want to be a National Geographic photographer, you stand right back up and you get to work. There's no time for moping, and they can't publish your excuses. Yeah. So we just get at it. We don't give up. That's the big thing. Don't give up.
I haven't heard that expression before, but it's absolutely perfect for journalism and photography, isn't it? You can't print excuses.
No, you cannot.
Great. Well, that's a great and hopefully inspirational place to leave, Joel. So thanks very much for being on the New Big Five podcast. It's been really good talking to you.
My pleasure. And I would encourage listeners to think about what they can do. Devote your life to. It could be a hobby. It could be full-time. What can you do to make the world better? It could be a social issue. It could be environmental. I don't care. But you got to do something. At the end of your days, in your declining hours, you really want to look in the mirror and smile knowing you did what you could and you're part of the world, don't you? I would really hope that some of your listeners take me up on this.
That's a great message. Thanks, Joel.
You bet. Thank you.
To everyone listening, please go onto the New Big Five website, newbig5.com, and vote for your choices to include in the New Big Five of wildlife photography. On the website, you can find many more podcasts, as well as interviews with photographers and conservationists, articles on climate change, conservation, and the world's wildlife, photography tips, photo galleries, and plenty more. Please help us spread the word about the New Big Five project by sharing it on social media. New Big Five. You can also find us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and Vimeo. If you'd like to get involved with the project, drop us a line. Contact details are on the website. Thanks for listening.